When we think of last words, we expect wisdom, regret, or a tearful goodbye. But what if I told you that some people left the world with jokes so sharp, they made death itself sound like a comedy show? From generals who mocked bullets, to writers who roasted wallpaper, history's funniest last words will leave you shocked, laughing, and maybe even questioning what your final line might be. Witty legends of history. When we think of death, most of us imagine heavy silence, tears, or perhaps words of wisdom passed on to loved ones. But then, there are those rare individuals who manage to leave the world not with sadness, but with laughter. Their wit was so sharp that even in their very last moments, they couldn't resist delivering one final punchline. Take the legendary playwright Oscar Wilde, for example. Known for his sharp tongue and flamboyant humor, Wilde spent his final days in a shabby Paris hotel. Lying weak and sick, he looked around the room and spotted the hideous wallpaper. With a smirk, he whispered, "Either that wallpaper goes, or I do." And soon after, he was gone. Imagine the scene, a man in unbearable pain, yet his last concern wasn't death itself, but bad interior decoration. It was pure Wilde, sarcastic, stylish, and unforgettable. Then there's Voltaire, the French philosopher who spent his entire life mocking authority, religion, and power with wit. On his deathbed, a priest asked him to renounce Satan so that he could die in peace. Voltaire, even with death seconds away, couldn't resist one last jab. He calmly replied, "Now is not the time for making enemies." Can you picture it? Instead of trembling in fear of the afterlife, Voltaire treated death like a political game, choosing humor over submission. What makes these stories so remarkable isn't just the words themselves, it's the mindset behind them. These men stared death straight in the eyes, and instead of bowing to fear, they cracked jokes that the world still laughs at today. Their final words remind us of something powerful. Humor can be eternal. It can outlive pain, fear, and even death itself. So while most last words fade into silence, the witty legends of history left behind echoes of laughter. And maybe, just maybe, that's the best way to be remembered. Irony that killed them. Sometimes life has a twisted sense of humor, and death delivers the ultimate punchline. Some of history's funniest last words weren't carefully crafted, but rather accidents of timing. Moments where irony stole the spotlight and turned tragedy into dark comedy. Take the case of General John Sedgwick, a Union officer during the American Civil War. Known for his bravery, Sedgwick stood tall on the battlefield while his men ducked for cover. Irritated by their fear, he mocked them. "Why are you dodging like this? They couldn't hit an elephant at this distance." And before he could finish, a Confederate bullet struck him down. His last sentence, cut short mid-word, became a chilling reminder that arrogance can be fatal. Soldiers mourned his loss, but history never forgot the ironic humor that death forced into his final words. Then there's Dominique Bourgeois, a French grammarian whose entire life was dedicated to the beauty and precision of language. As he lay dying in 1702, even in his final breath, he couldn't resist correcting himself. He said, "I am about to, or I am going to, die." Either expression is correct. Imagine that. At the very moment most people would cry out in fear or silence, Bourgeois was still proofreading his own speech. His obsession with grammar became his punchline, immortalizing him as a man who literally died editing himself. What's striking about these moments is that they weren't scripted or planned. They reveal the raw, unfiltered truth of who these people were. Sedgwick died as a bold general who underestimated danger, while Bourgeois died as a perfectionist scholar who cared more about grammar than death itself. The irony is what makes their last words so unforgettable. It's as though fate itself had a sense of humor, carefully waiting for the perfect moment to flip tragedy into comedy. And when history remembers them, it It doesn't focus only on their death. It remembers the laugh hidden inside the silence of their final words. Everyday people, extraordinary humor. Not all of history's funniest last words come from kings, generals, or great thinkers. Sometimes the most unforgettable ones come from ordinary people, those who face death with humor, so raw and natural that it feels almost cinematic. Take, for instance, a man who decided to attempt a dangerous stunt. Friends warned him it was risky, but he shrugged off their concerns with a laugh and said, "This will be a piece of cake." Seconds later, the stunt went horribly wrong, and those became his final words. The irony stung, but his casual, almost careless sense of humor turned his death into a story that people retold for decades. His overconfidence wasn't just tragic, it was strangely hilarious in the most human way. Then there's the story of a man in a bar, already weak and close to the end. Instead of requesting last prayers or silence, he called out to the bartender, "Bring me a whiskey and a priest." It was as if he wanted one last drink to toast life, but also a quick path to salvation, just in case. That blend of comedy and desperation makes his words so striking. He didn't choose between faith and pleasure, he asked for both, with a smile. What makes these stories different from those of famous figures is their simplicity. These weren't polished lines meant to echo through history. They were ordinary, spontaneous moments that captured raw human nature. Humor isn't only for the brilliant or the powerful, it belongs to everyone. And sometimes the funniest lines are spoken by people we might otherwise never have remembered. In a strange way, these everyday last words teach us that laughter is universal. Whether you're on a grand stage or in a small pub, humor can be the final gift you leave behind. And perhaps it's those unpolished, ordinary jokes that connect to us most deeply, because they remind us of ourselves. Dark humor, sarcasm at the end. Some people face death with fear, some with silence, but a rare few face it with sarcasm so sharp that it outlives them. Their last words weren't just jokes, they were bold statements that mocked the very idea of dying. This is where dark humor takes center stage. Consider the case of Richard B. Mellon, a wealthy banker who shared a lifelong game of tag with his brother. For decades, the two chased each other around like children, always trying to pass on the title of it. On his deathbed in 1933, Mellon leaned in close to his brother and whispered, "You're it." With that final line, he ended both his life and the longest game of tag in history. Imagine the mix of grief and laughter in that room. Even in death, Mellon made sure the game and the humor lived on. Then there's James Donald French, a convicted murderer facing execution in 1966. As he prepared for the electric chair, reporters gathered to record his final moments. Instead of fear or regret, French looked at them and quipped, "Hey fellas, how about this for tomorrow's headline? French fries." It was morbid, it was shocking, and yet it was undeniably clever. He took control of his narrative with one last sarcastic jab, turning his execution into a headline that history never forgot. These examples show us something powerful. Sarcasm can be an armor, even against death itself. Where most people might break down, these men chose to go out with laughter, leaving behind stories that feel larger than life. Their humor wasn't lighthearted. It was dark, bold, and fearless. And maybe that's why their last words are so memorable. They remind us that while death might have the final say, humor can still get the last laugh. Last words of pure denial. Not all funny last words are witty or sarcastic. Sometimes they're funny because of sheer denial. Take the case of drummer Buddy Rich, a famous jazz musician. Before undergoing surgery in 1987, a nurse asked him, "Is there anything you can't take?" Buddy, already weak and close to death, fired back, "Yeah, country music." Hours later, he passed away. Even with death knocking at his door, he couldn't resist taking one last jab at a genre he despised. It's moments like these that show us how humor is deeply personal. For Buddy Rich, comedy wasn't about being remembered as clever. It was simply about being himself, even in his last breath. That authenticity, wrapped in humor, is what makes such words echo far beyond the moment they were spoken. And there you have it, some of the funniest last words in history. What's truly fascinating is how these people faced the scariest moment of all, not with fear, but with wit, sarcasm, and laughter. From Oscar Wilde joking about wallpaper to a murderer turning his execution into a punchline, these final words remind us that humor doesn't die, even when we do. It lingers, echoing through history, making us laugh centuries later. So tell me, if you had just one final line before leaving this world, would it be wise, tragic, or hilarious? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this dark but funny journey through history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss more bizarre and unforgettable stories. After all, life may end in silence, but a good joke can last forever.